Hi, I'm Kristin Omdahl and welcome back to my studio. In this video, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to make one of the projects from my newest knitting book, Layers. This is the Samantha Lace and Drop Stitch Shawl. Worked as a reversible fabric, this magical wrap showcases a beautiful mixture of two yarns held together. The drop stitches add texture, exquisite drape, and jaw-dropping drama. We'll be using 1 ball of Be So Fine Bling yarn, 4 balls of Be So Dazzling sequin yarn. The two yarns are held together throughout the entire project. And we'll be using a size US 6 4mm knitting needle. We'll also be using a yarn needle, scissors, and stitch markers for this project. Follow the links in the video description to download the pattern, order an autographed copy of my newest knitting book, Layers, and get information on how to order the yarn and other materials we'll be using in this project. In addition to the written instructions, including the multiple factor for how to cast on, which is really great if you want to modify the size of this pattern. Not only do you know how many stitches to cast on to make the full size shawl, but if you want to modify it at all, it's a multiple of 12 plus 5. In addition to all of this, you also have a chart if you prefer following instructions from a chart. There is a key to go over all of the stitches that are used. We're going to be using knit, yarn over, slip, slip, knit, knit 2 together, and S2KP. If you need help or a refresher on any of these stitches, please follow the link in the video description to my knit stitch library of videos, which might be really helpful for giving you a refresher. So I've cast on for my shawl, and we're using both yarns held together throughout the project. We will be using stitch markers for this, so let me get those handy. It's really, really, really important to use stitch markers in this project. I know I don't always say that. Sometimes I like to live dangerously, but because we're dropping the stitches on either side of the lace panels here, if you have made a mistake and you drop a stitch within the lace, it is extremely difficult to fix that. So you really want to make sure that you're keeping your stitches in the right places, because there is no forgiveness in dropping the stitches. So as long as we do the stitch markers, we will be absolutely fine. So I cast on a multiple of 12 plus 5, and I knit across for the first row. Row 2 is our first lace row, or stitch pattern row, however you want to call it. And we'll also be adding our stitch markers here. I like to add a contrast color because I'm using pink sequins as well as pink Be So Fine Bling. I'm going to go with a contrast color, so maybe a turquoise will be fine. And we'll grab a couple of these to get them ready. Okay, row 2 begins with a knit 2, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 3, and then we're going to place our marker. Knit 5, place a marker, knit 2, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 3. Okay, so the asterisk began with our first place marker, so we'll repeat this across the entire row. This is what the end of row 2 should look like. Row 3 and all odd numbered rows are going to be to just knit all the way across. Okay, we're ready for row 4 now. Row 4 begins with a knit 1, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, slip, slip, knit, and knit 1. Slip our marker, knit 5, and slip our marker, then knit 1, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, slip, slip, knit, and knit 1. The asterisk for our repeat started at the first slip marker, so you want to repeat this now across the entire row. After row 4, we did row 5, which is just to knit across all of the stitches. So now we're ready for row 6. Row 6 begins with a knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, slip, slip, knit. Slip the marker, knit 5, slip the marker, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, slip, slip, knit. This repeat, the asterisk for this repeat started at that first stitch marker, so you want to repeat from there to here across the entire row. And then row 7 will knit all the way across. Okay, we've done row 7, and you may be wondering, where are those gorgeous drop stitches? Well, don't worry, we're going to get to them. You'll see the drop stitches. It's going to be this miraculous transformation in the bind off row. So let's get through the whole repeat through row 10, and then I'll show you that amazing bind off that drops the stitches and creates that really gorgeous lace. So row 8 begins with a knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2, slip, slip, knit, yarn over, knit 1, slip our marker, knit 5, slip our marker, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2, slip, slip, knit, yarn over, knit 1. And our repeat, or the asterisk, starts at that first stitch marker, so you want to repeat from here to here to the end of the row. Then on row 9, knit all the way across. Before we begin row 10, I wanted to just go over a couple of things on the chart. Notice how all the numbers are written on the right hand side of the chart. That's because you're meant to read them from where the number is. If we had pattern stitches to show on the odd numbered rows, they would be marked over here and you'd be going back and forth this way. But because we're doing just knitting on the odd numbered rows, it's only necessary to show the pattern instructions for the even numbered rows. And so you just want to follow and make sure you go in the same direction as where the numbers are listed. So we're ready to do row 10 right now. And notice it doesn't mention the stitch markers, so it is helpful to refer back down to the written instructions as well to make sure that you have your stitch markers in the correct place. So now we'll begin with row 10 with a knit 2, yarn over, and then we have an S2KP, and that means we're going to slip the next 2 stitches, then knit the next stitch, and pass the 2 slip stitches up and over the knit stitch, which is a double bind off. And I'll show you that again when we get to the next repeat. Yarn over, knit 2, slip our marker, knit 5, slip our marker, knit 2, okay, yarn over, slip 2, slip the next 2 stitches to the right hand needle, knit the next stitch, pass the 2 slip stitches back over that first stitch and up and off the needle. So we've decreased from 3 stitches to 1, yarn over, knit 2. Okay, our repeat began with the first stitch marker, so you want to repeat from here to here across the entire row for row 10. For this pattern, you're going to repeat rows 1 and 10 until you've reached your desired height of the project. But the width is going to drastically change now in our bind off. And how we're going to do that is to start with a bind off 7 stitches. So we're basically going to be binding off the stitches to that first stitch marker. So we'll knit 2 to bind off 1, knit the next stitch to bind off 2, knit the next stitch to bind off 3, knit the next stitch to bind off 4, knit the next stitch to bind off 5, and knit the next stitch to bind off 6. Okay, now that 7th stitch now needs to be fastened off, so we're going to carry our yarns now. We want to get at least a good 3 feet of yarn here. You would want to do 3 yards if you're doing the whole project. So I'm not going to do that much, but if you have, this is just a reduced size sample. So if you're doing the full size, you want to make sure you do a very long tail, because we're going to be using that tail now to bind off the entire row. So now you could use a crochet hook or you could use your fingers. It doesn't really matter. You just want to get those tails through that last live stitch to bind it off, to fasten it off. And you want to be careful with the sequins to make sure that they pull through. If you have too much trouble binding off with the sequin yarn, you could fasten the sequin yarn off and just do the bind off with the bling yarn instead. Okay, so now we're going to take the stitch marker off, and those next 5 stitches, are you ready for it? We're going to drop them off our needle and we're going to unravel them back down to the cast on. You'll unravel them all the way back down. It'll be easier to do this when we have everything off our needle, but I wanted to get an idea for how wide it's going to be so that I know how long to carry this tail over to bind off my next section of stitches. So you could either bind this all off at once. Let me get that tail cut off and get it out of the way. There's our cast on tail. So just want to take your time doing this. Sometimes when you pin it out to block it, that extra tautness to the yarn helps in unraveling them a little bit too. This takes a little time, especially to get the ones on the edge. And the sequins can sometimes be a little persnickety in there. You just want to be patient and take your time, and they will all unravel back. And it's so worth the time and trouble to do it because the texture of the 2 yarns looks absolutely exquisite as drop stitches. Okay, so we've got an idea of how wide that's going to be now. So I can take off my next stitch marker, grab my needle again, and I'm going to knit the next 2 stitches to bind off, but my tail is coming from all the way over here, so you just want to make sure that you leave it long enough to not pucker that stretched area for the drop stitches. So I feel like that's a good size. So I will now knit the next 2 stitches to bind off 1, knit another one to bind off 2, knit another one to bind off 3, knit another one to bind off 4, and knit another one to bind off 5, and another one to bind off 6. And then for our last one here, we're going to fasten it off. And I just find that it's a little easier to use a crochet hook at this point, but if you wanted to use your fingers, it'd be totally fine. I just feel like I'm already holding so many things in my hands right now, keeping the yarn on, keeping the needles going, that I just find it a little easier to grab a crochet hook. Okay, and then our next section of 5 stitches, we will drop right off the needle and unravel all the way back down to our cast on edge. And if they get stuck a little bit, just be patient with them. They will unravel. The sequins can get caught up in there a little bit, but that's okay. Just take your time. You know, a crochet hook might help too. If you need to stretch out a stitch to get the, even a yarn needle just to poke in there might help too. And you'll notice that if you've missed some of the stitches on the edges, it'll become very clear once you block it. You'll be able to see very clearly where there are a couple of stitches that still need to unravel. And then we'll bind off the rest of the stitches to the end, but we're going to pick up that tail, and as we pick up to knit that first stitch, we're going to make sure that we make it long enough so that it doesn't pucker the drop stitch section. And then we'll bind off to the end. It's that easy. And what a way to transform a fabric than with intentional drop stitches in the bind off edge. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions at all, please leave them for me in the comments. There's links in the video description on how to download the pattern or order an autographed copy of my newest knitting book, Layers, and the yarn and everything else that we talked about in this project, as well as links to entire playlists for all sorts of different videos here on my YouTube channel. Let us make time to create, share, and inspire today and every day. I'll see you in the next video.